boot camp for developers, Bitcoin developers, and I asked you how many, and you said 7. I immediately thought of those Mercury astronauts. I think there might have been 7 of them, and they were called the Mercury 7. And that was the beginning of the astronaut role in the United States, and the beginning of the Apollo space program. And one very visionary president, John F. Kennedy, set the motion, set the tone by saying, we will land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. I feel President Bukele, similarly, the JFK meets Steve Jobs of presidents, has made a goal for this country to be absolutely the leader in Bitcoin globally and to make Bitcoin the global standard. And those 7 developers are the beginning. They're going to take this country to the Bitcoin moon.
You know, you said you think there were 7 astronauts. They were called the Mercury 7. So usually it sounds like the name suggests that there were 7. So I'm assuming there were 7.
Well, sometimes I think of the Secaucus 7, which was a political organization at that time near to the Weather Underground. You remember, I'm a child of the 70s, and a lot of what happened during that decade I don't remember, which is kind of not Euclidean geometry. It's not algebra. It's a special mathematical formula that's built on the root of 7 and then goes in a direction that many would say is improbable. It's Jamie Dimon, right before they shot a scene from Eyes Wide Shut. He's with a group of scantily clad bankers somewhere in a lair underneath Wall Street doing unnatural things. I was talking to Josue Lopez about this. You know, he's a private equity guy from Switzerland. He's been on our show. And he said, look, the way the private equity crowd is looking at these bonds is at 23, 24 cents on the dollar. It's an easy double. And because the underlying fundamentals in this country are outstanding, and the market is unusually punishing these bonds purely out of spite, purely for political reasons. And so this is where private equity, that's how you become a billionaire. That's why Josue is going to be a billionaire, because he looks at this stuff and he's like, you know what? I want to be a billionaire. I'm going to buy this paper at 23 cents on the dollar. It's going to go to 40, 50, 60 cents on the dollar, and I'm going to have the last laugh. That's how billionaires become billionaires. I've never seen the word autarky in a financial report. And you're right, when you first see it, you're like, well, that's a positive thing, because they're insulating themselves from the vagaries of these outside markets that seem like they're in chaos. And they have Bitcoin, and they're growing their own GDP organically. They've got the tourism, they've got the forward investment coming in, they've got the infrastructure build out, and they really are, it really is an autarky. But that's in this context, that's not a negative. And I think that's where investors potentially are seeing this. You know what? This is a non-correlated asset, to put it in pure financial terms. When you're investing today in a world dominated by these global central banks, who are all in the same trade, they're all on the same side of the same trade, and that is easy money. El Salvador is going against the trend and saying, you know, we can grow organically our own economy. Bitcoin is at the center of it, and we're not exposed to that risk. So if you're trying to get an uncorrelated trade and get pure alpha, pure return, El Salvador is probably the best, most underrated play in the globe today. Right, markets can remain irrational longer than you have funds. And so having a bias in a market setting can be death to a portfolio performance. And to your point, it's an autarky not by the suggestion of those running the country. The country, as you point out, is opening to the world and saying, come on in and invest. And they're getting a lot of investment from around the world. But it's the perception from people who have that bias. And that's why they're missing the bet. They can't even describe it accurately in a financial paper. And that's where the smart money sees, you know what, there's an arbitrage here between the perception and what's really on the ground. And obviously Salvadorans, who are in the money market business, as we've just mentioned, they are salivating at this opportunity, and money's being raised in the billions. I was a stockbroker in the 80s, very successful. I had a .com in the 90s, very successful. I started buying Bitcoin in 2011 at $1, very successful. I'm now in El Salvador. Is that a freaking coincidence? Or am I going to be in the place that I want to be? I want to be in the hot place. I want to be in the hot market. I want to be where the parrots and the torgos are flying around free. It's free to be who they are. And I want to have Bitcoin grenades exploding all over the world. And I want this to work. And I want it to work this week. That's what I want.
And I'm going to read you a headline, Max. JP Morgan trader spoofed so fast Colleagues urged ice on fingers. Greg Smith clicked his computer mouse so rapidly to place and cancel bogus gold and silver orders for Bear Stearns and later JP Morgan that his colleagues would joke that he needed to put ice on his fingers to cool them down afterward, or that he just must be double jointed.
We've been saying for years now, reporting on JP Morgan spoofing or manipulating the precious metals markets, and they deny it. But now the proof is coming out. And this is what America is all about. Manipulating the markets, playing video games, getting finger, burns and calluses on their finger by manipulating the markets. And that's why that economy is going into the toilet, because they've got nobody doing anything productive in that frickin' wasteland between Canada and Mexico called America. It's a complete dump. Whereas down here in Central America, people are saying, you know what? We've been down, now we're going to be up, and we're productive, and that's a total different story. Right. Well, this whole idea started with Stacy Herbert recognizing that to get this revolution going here in El Salvador, they needed homegrown developers, homegrown Bitcoin developers. And she got in touch with you, of course, because you're probably the most notable guy who's out there teaching the Bitcoin development curriculum. And you made a comment early on, and I wanted to ask you about it. You said something to the effect of, well, all you need is 8 or 9 hardcore Bitcoin developers to get the ball rolling. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah. Does El Salvador have an opportunity to be kind of the Central American and even a Latin American hub for sourcing Bitcoin developers from the region and around the world? Is that a possibility? Now, you had the chance to meet Ibrahim Bukele, one of the brothers of the president. He managed to pass the test, actually. It would take to enter the program, the Bitcoin course. So he's obviously a smart guy. How do you feel that conversation went in terms of the vision of the future of El Salvador? I was in the room when this happened, and you were talking about how the test to get into the course is a fairly strenuous test. And Ibrahim asked, well, what's a question for the test? And you gave him the question, and he solved it in 15 seconds. So what does that tell you? Does that give you confidence? So the average course load for a high school student and even a college student in schools around the world would be these legacy mathematical curriculums, which you point out, trigonometry and other mathematical disciplines. And what you're saying is that in the Bitcoin era, it's really moved on to a different paradigm. You call it discrete mathematics. I looked at that briefly on Wikipedia. It covers elliptical curve and graphs and things like that. So just briefly, what is discrete mathematics? And I should mention that it is raining outside. This is the rainy season. If you hear the rain, welcome to El Salvador in the rainy season. But how would you differentiate these two from having the problem of just having mosquitoes? It was a tropical latitudes, and it required Herculean effort to get rid of this, and that really was something simple like that, seemingly, but it was the basis for really a big transformation. And here, we're talking about the Renaissance, the Salvadoran Renaissance, an actual cultural transformation, because Bitcoin is really something that gets people, as you say, it's an infection almost, and the rain is really coming down now, and I hope this is coming through. But anyway, the Renaissance and cultural transformation, you said you were here 6 months ago, and you've come back and you see some changes. Are you seeing hints of this type of vision?